Good morning. This is the sixth lesson on climate change, adaptation and mitigation strategies. We will focus on forests in a changing climate. My name is Simone Mereu from the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change. A bit of rehearsal. Where are the CO2 emissions coming from and where are they going? Well, 91% is coming from human activities, 32 gigatons of CO2 per year, while 9% are actually coming from forests. Where is it going? Well, 26% is going into the oceans. 29% is going into forests, being absorbed by forests, whereas 44% is going to the atmosphere. This is what is actually causing global change. So ecosystems in general absorb about 55% of the total emissions. So why are terrestrial ecosystems so important to reduce net CO2 emissions? Well, first of all, they are part of the problem because 26% of the emissions are coming from energy supply, 13% from transport, 19% from industry, whereas for forestry and agriculture account for 17% and 14% in respectively. So forestry is so high basically mostly because of deforestation of tropical areas. 13 million hectares per year are being deforested, which is about 1/3 of the Italian surface each year. But terrestrial ecosystems are also components, key components, I would say, of the solution. That's because terrestrial ecosystems are both a source and a sink for atmospheric carbon dioxide. They're a source when the sum of the total respiration, oxidation of plants, soil, and organic material exceeds the net primary production, whereas they become sink where this balance is positive. So terrestrial ecosystems account for about 64% of the global net primary productivity, whereas 32% is in marine ecosystems and 4% of aquatic ecosystems. Of the terrestrial ecosystems, forests are the one that absorbs the most, about 2/3 of the total of the terrestrial ecosystems. So they're quite important. Where is the accumulated carbon going? Well, most of it is going in the soil. On average, 3/4 of it are going is stocked in soils. But this percentage, as you can see, really changes with ecosystem types. So wetlands, most of the carbon is below ground. All ecosystems have most of the carbon stocked below ground, with the only exception of tropical forests, where it's more or less 50% above ground and 50% below ground. So the net primary productivity varies with ecosystem type, and it is influenced by climate change. Let's see in which ways and how it depends on the type of ecosystem. So the tropical forests are highly productive and cover a large portion of the global surface. Thus, they highly contribute to the total carbon accumulation. However, deforestation and high temperatures that are reducing their productivity are major issues. Temperate and boreal forests, instead, will increase their productivity under higher global temperature, potentially compensating for the lower productivity of tropical forests. However, this potential in higher productivity due to higher temperatures may be counteracted by low water availability in the temperate forests, whereas it may be highly counteracted in boreal forests because of emissions coming from peatlands and permafrosts. In this sense, they could actually become part of the problem again, as they could become net CO2 emitters. Oceans, well, oceans have a low productivity, but they cover a large portion of the global surface. So because of this, they highly contribute to the global productivity. However, their productivity may decline because of acidification, which we encounter because of CO2 being dissolved in the oceans, and there are limits posed to their productivity because of low nutrient availability. Important note, net carbon accumulation of terrestrial systems will likely peak before half of the century, and then it will decrease afterwards and could be actually become a net source of carbon, amplifying climate change. Now, the impacts on terrestrial ecosystems. Well, first of all, temperature, higher temperatures, will change their phenology. So we may see shifts in when plants are actually absorbing. They could have shorter cycles, for example. So this is one major effect of temperature. We might see altitudinal shifts of species, so moving to the cooler parts. And in general, you will see contraction of suitable habitats for highly specialized species. So this endangering, causing potential biodiversity loss. The effect of higher CO2. Well, in this sense, you might have higher photosynthesis and higher water use efficiency. Partially, this could compensate for global change. However, the lower water consumption and higher productivity can only be achieved if sustained by nutrients. And then you have extreme events. So as temperature and climate change, it's not an average homogeneous change. Also, extreme events are likely to increase in frequency and intensity. And this may cause increased erosion and thus reduction of habitats again, so loss of rare species, overcoming of species adaptive thresholds, so aridity. You might have one single year extremely dry, and that could actually cause a high mortality. And fire risk. So one year, again, very warm, very dry. This will increase fire risk, and your forest might be completely burnt in only one year. So the carbon stocks, they are very important, and we're becoming quite good at estimating them. However, there are huge uncertainties in estimating them because of, especially of extreme events, or in general, how climate change will affect the stability of sinks in the long term. Because you can have major storms that can completely make a carbon stock of forest disappear, large portions. Insects and disease, which may increase with climate change. That's because if plants are not in their perfect form, then they are more susceptible to insects and disease. Droughts, we already mentioned them. So a drought can completely offset your carbon stock, and wildfires, as we were saying. So what are some of the effects of climate change on ecosystems? One of them is migration. So the ecosystems and species we find are the result of evolutional associations with climatic zones. So climatic zones will strongly shift, and their range may either expand or reduce. So there is a progressive shift of bioclimatic zones towards north and higher altitudes. Species will tend to follow this climatic shift. However, their dispersal speed ranges only between 40 and 20 kilometers per generation. What you see below is a study by Zomer et al. In 2013, where you can see on the graph to the left, on the map to the left, what are the present climatic zones and how they will shift under the RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5 climate change scenarios. And as you can see, there are huge changes in the range of these climatic zones. So the strongest impacts of climate change will be on mountain vegetation, because here you have a strong climatic gradient. Ecosystems at medium and high altitudes are at risk of compression, range reduction of suitable climatic zones. Annual species, herbaceous species, have a faster dispersion compared to perennial species, such as trees. So you will have that many of the new climatic zones will be first, in the short term, will be colonized by herbaceous species. And as you can see in this simulation of 3.5 higher temperature and a plus 10% precipitation change scenario, some of the ecosystems will not be able to shift, they will actually disappear. For example, the subalpine mountain scrub vegetation will not be possible in the near future. So ecosystem migration is actually already happening. An altitudinal shift is being observed in Spain, where Fagus sylvatica is being replaced by Quercus ilex at lower altitudes. And the species composition in Italy has changed over the past 10 years by about 10–20%, with a net increase especially in drought-tolerant species. Now, model simulations of different kinds are showing how Quercus cherries forests are destined to disappear in coastal areas. Quercus pubescens forests are destined to disappear at medium heights in Sardinia. Fagus sylvatica and Castanea sativa are destined to disappear at medium altitudes again and find refuge in mountains above 1,300 meters, while the evergreen and broad-leaved forests will maintain their presence and they will increase their range to replace Fagus sylvatica and Castanea sativa. So the consequences will be of a reduced productivity and a change in phenology. In general, a degradation of biomass, so an increase in carbon emissions, an increased susceptibility to biotic, pests, and abiotic, fire disturbances. Please note, these may act synergistically because as plants die, this will increase the fuel, the potential fuel for fire, so they will increase in fire risks. What can we do? Some adaptation strategies. Management of protected areas, this is very important. Assisted migration, so since the dispersal rate of forests may be too low compared to the rapid climatic shift we're facing, we must help these plants to migrate to their new climatic areas. Besides planting new plants, which is of course an option, we can do other things. We can strengthen the protection of biorefuge and of the most threatened forest by creating or conserving migration corridors that ensure connectivity between habitats. So basically what you want to do is to create this corridor and control your forest or your area, protect it from other human activities so that it covers a whole climatic, altitudinal, perhaps gradient. Forest management land use plans should take into account the migration requirements of forests. Now, as already mentioned in previous lessons, in the Mediterranean, climate temperature especially is changing faster than it is in the rest of the world. And I would like to remind you again that to keep global temperatures increase between 1.5 and 2 degrees, CO2 absorbed by forests, it must increase substantially. This is the IPCC report 2018. So forests provide a large number of ecosystem services so that forest management, afforestation, and forestation practices can be used synergistically to mitigate climate change on one hand, but also as tools for adaptation. What is that we're talking about when we speak about ecosystem services by forests? Well, first of all, ecosystem services, as explained in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment already in 2005, they are the many and varied benefits that we, humans, freely gain from the natural environment and from properly functioning ecosystems. They're divided in four categories. The provisioning services. This is actually what we materially get from forest. This is food production, water, wood and fiber, and fuel. Then you have the cultural services, which are often underestimated in importance, but they are very important because many forests have an aesthetic value, also a spiritual value to many, an educational value, and a recreational value. Then you have the regulating services. So this is regulating climate, the flood regulation, water purification, and then the supporting services. These are the ones that are mostly linked to ecosystem functions, such as nutrient cycling, soil formation, that's accumulation of carbon, by the way, primary production, again important for mitigation, and habitat provisioning to other life forms. So forests, they provide a number of goods, of course, and it's very large. A non-exhaustive list is wood and wood products, for example, biomass-based energy, climate regulation, carbon sequestration, pollution control, especially in urban areas or peri-urban areas, this is very important. Soil protection and formation, so control from erosion, nutrient cycling, biodiversity protection, water regulation and supply, recreation, disturbance regulation. And if you want to know a bit more about ecosystem services, you can follow this link on a set of documents you can find produced by the JRC. So let's see about something about the services connected to the hydrological cycle. This is tricky when you're planning your territory because on site, forest will increase evapotranspiration, so you will have an accelerated hydrological cycle. You will have increased water infiltration, so your groundwater recharge may be better. As higher soil water retention and improved soil chemical and physical characteristics. These are all very good. But what happens off-site when you move to the hydrological basin? Well, still a positive effect because the forest will regulate your water flows between humid and dry periods. So you will not have peaks during the humid period and you still will have some water during the dry period. So it's more distributed over time, and this is good, especially for the minimum environmental flows. However, the increased water use and retention by forest on site may limit water availability downstream, especially in semi-arid environments as the Mediterranean. So when you're planning your forests or your forestation or afforestation, perhaps you want to consider who and what you have downstream, and especially if you have agricultural lands that needs water. So as I was saying, afforestation, reforestation in arid environments, especially with exotic, low-efficient species, must be avoided to avoid lowering of the water table and drying of rivers. Soil stability. They're important, as we were saying, they're very important for soil stability, not only erosion, we're talking about landslides. So protect forest and plant forest in areas with high hydrological risk. This happens basically because the roots simply go deeper in the soil, increase or infiltration, but also keep the soil together. So this is an important way of using forests to protect yourself from hydrological risks. This is the final note, ecosystem services and biodiversity relationships. It is found that in general, mixed forests or mixed or ecosystems in general with a high biodiversity, they provide enhanced ecosystem services compared to monocultures. For example, wood production of mixed forests is higher compared to monocultures. They provide more fodder, so the yield again is higher. Primary production, carbon sequestration, carbon storage is higher in mixed forests compared to monocultures. Also, the soil nutrient mineralization and the soil organic matter, the capacity to purify water and to increase pollination is higher in mixed forest. So one thing you want to do when you're managing your forests or your plantations, or you are afforesting or foresting, you want to promote mixed forest, as these can be better for mitigating climate change. They will absorb more carbon and they will provide many enhanced ecosystem services. So in conclusions, just your take-home messages. At a global scale, forested areas must increase to keep global temperature increase below 2 degrees. Migration of forest must be assisted with migration corridors or new plantations. Besides mitigating climate change, forests provide multiple ecosystem services. So, however, they may have an unintended negative impact on water availability downstream, important for agriculture, and land use plans should carefully consider this aspect. High mortality is likely to increase in forests, leaving high quantities of dead wood that will increase fire risk. So authorities should develop plans to remove the dead wood as quickly as possible. Mixed forests should be promoted as they are more productive and resilient to abiotic and biotic disturbances. This is all. Enjoy the test and thank you.